touch. That touch that made Pillow Talk the talk of the town. That touch that made Lover Come Back the comedy hit that everyone loved. Now that touch is in That Touch of Mink, starring Cary Grant and Doris Day. And listen to the raves it's touched off. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times says, lively and lilting. This one has as much glittering verbal wit as Pillow Talk and Lover Come Back. And Kate Cameron of the Daily News adds, 4 stars. The funny situations, the clever use of slapstick, and the delightful teamwork of its co-stars make one side's ache with laughter and leaves the audience in stitches. And columnist Earl Wilson calls it screamingly hilarious. Don't miss Cary Grant and Doris Day in That Touch of Mink in Eastman Color and Panavision. Plus the spectacular stage show, Summertime, now playing at the Radio City Music Hall.
This is the time of year when some of us sit outside on a warm evening, look up at the sky, and get just a little bit nostalgic about the old familiar love songs. You know, June, Moon, Croon, Spoon, and so on. But what if one day people are living on the moon? Will lovers be looking up at this old world of ours shining like a silver dollar in the evening sky? What'll they be thinking about? After all, what can songwriters do with a word like Earth?
Journey into Nature, a special series of programs produced by WNBC in cooperation with the American Museum of Natural History, an institution dedicated to the search for knowledge in the fields of natural science. Within the many exhibit halls of the museum, you will find accurate representations of what man has learned of himself and the world that surrounds him. Journey into Nature visits many of the exhibits, talks with the staff members and research scientists in order to capture in sound the wealth of knowledge on display, to bring you the excitement of learning, to explore the wonders of the world. Here now is your host, Tex Antoine.
Thank you. Well, most of us remember how Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climbed to the top of Mount Everest and met what was perhaps the last great challenge to man's exploration of the Earth's surface. Fewer perhaps recall the excitement of the international scramble to discover Antarctica, or the thrilling race to the South Pole in 1911 by the Norwegian explorer Amundsen and the English explorer Scott. But right now, we're involved in another international struggle, which might only be compared to the search 500 years ago for the New World. The United States and the Soviet Union are racing to reach the moon. Our program is known as Project Apollo. And to tell us about it this morning, I'm happy to welcome Dr. Franklin M. Brandley, Associate Astronomer at the American Museum Hayden Planetarium. Dr. Brandley, did the recent orbital flights of John Glenn and Scott Carpenter contribute anything concrete to the Project Apollo?
Yes, it certainly did, because we are concerned about how to put a man into orbit and how to get him back again, and in both cases, these operations proved to work out very nicely. Also, we want to learn how to simplify the instrumentation of a space vehicle. And Scott Carpenter and Glenn were able to operate the controls manually, and this, of course, means that we can cut down on some of the backup instrumentation.
Well, since our Project Apollo is actually the broad overall program involving many operations, how did it all begin, and what were some of the first steps in the project?
Well, I would say, Tex, that this goes way back, probably into 1955 or thereabouts, when some of the upper echelons were considering manned exploration of space, but those were the dream stages. I would say that the hardware stages probably began with the recent Ranger shot, the vehicle that was supposed to land on the moon but missed the moon, the satellite that's now in orbit around the sun. And then Ranger, we think, did land on the moon.
That shot was considered pretty basically a success. They're continuing to build them, aren't they?
Well, the Ranger was very successful as far as the rocketry was concerned because it was right on target. It landed on the moon. but the instrumentation didn't work because the radio jammed or failed to operate for some reason or other. We don't know exactly why. So we didn't get the information from it that we wanted to get.
Well, I imagine with our improving technology, I suppose it won't be a matter of months, less than a year probably, before we will start getting the information we want.
Well, I'm sure we'll have a Ranger shot later this summer, early this fall, and this shot we hope will be successful in terms of instrumentation, and also we're going to actually land a seismometer on the moon with the next Ranger shot. This will be encased in a balsa wood ball, about 30 inches in diameter, with an engine attached to it. And as the Ranger comes in close to the moon, this balsa ball will be ejected. Together with its engine, the engine will fire and slow down the fall so that the balsa ball will land on the moon. We hope with enough impact to open it up, but not enough to break the instruments inside. Then this seismometer will start operating and measure pulses or undulations, vibrations in the surface of the moon, and also impacts of meteors that fall upon the moon. And we expect that these are very numerous indeed.
Gee, it sounds, you put it down so simply that you're going to throw this ball at the moon and expect it to land. The odds of success are very good then. Oh,
I think they're very good, and we know how to launch a vehicle and put it into an orbit that will take it to the moon, and it's just a matter of working out some of these bugs that always seem to get into the instrumentation and mess it up some way or other.
Well, whatever other information will they be seeking with the Ranger besides dropping the ball on the moon?
Well, the Ranger will be equipped with a TV transmitter so that we'll be able to get photographs of the moon from an elevation of about 2,400 feet.
Oh, that close?
Yes. And this, of course, should mean that we'll get sharper pictures than ever before have been available to us. Also, we're going to attempt to measure the gravitational field, but more particularly the magnetic field of the moon. Mm-hmm. The Russian lunar probe indicated that there is no magnetic field. But this is not widely accepted because we don't know the instrumentation that was aboard that particular vehicle. We don't know how sensitive it was. It would be very interesting to establish once and for all whether there is a magnetic field or not, because this would be related to the structure of the moon, we think.
It would be very important for future manned exploration of the moon to know that in
very
advance.
Much so.
Well, Dr. Brandley, the Ranger seems to have quite a score ahead of it. It's kind of our throwing arm, you might say, pitching at the moon.
Yes.
After that comes what?
Well, the Ranger is sometimes classified as a hard landing vehicle, and the Surveyor is a soft landing. The Surveyor is a highly sophisticated vehicle that will set down softly on tripod legs onto the surface of the moon. And once it lands there, then it'll go into action. In other words, one thing that'll happen will be that a drill will be extended from the Surveyor vehicle and will drill a 6-foot hole in the moon, not 6 feet across, but 6 feet deep, about 4 or 5 inches in diameter. And once this hole is drilled, then a sensitive Geiger counter will be lowered down into the hole, and as it moves down through inches and inches and inches of depth, it'll transmit to the Earth the radioactivity level at the various depths. And by knowing the nature of the radioactivity, geologists can extrapolate the nature of the lunar crust. This will be one way of doing it. Another way will be to have a microscope attached up to a TV transmitter, and a piece of gum tape will be thrown out onto the moon. This will pick up lunar dust, and the tape will move across the stage of the microscope, and as it moves across the view, will be picked up. The picture will be transmitted to the Earth, so we'll see what lunar dust looks like under microscopic magnification.
And this this will all be done by remote control.
That's right, all by radio
Sounds
control.
fantastic. This will make a science fiction book of even 5 years ago sound rather prosaic and square, as they say.
Well, it really will, because it is so true that what we are doing actually is much more exciting than anything you read about.
Is
in
this
fiction.
is the Surveyor program on paper now, or is it in the hardware stage?
Oh, it's in the hardware stage. It's all engineered. The main drawback in a lot of these plans is the launching vehicle.
The first 5,000 feet.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. It seems strange that man still is saddled with that, the first big jump, and from then on things seem to work surprisingly well after thousands of miles of traveling,
Yes.
but it's the first little jump off the Earth that is still our problem. Well, if the Surveyor is made in the way you describe, practically a human brain being transposed, our brain being transposed to the moon by remote control, lowering itself tail first on the surface of the moon, all that, why couldn't a rocket package be attached to it so it could, blast off and come back to Earth and bring its information with it?
How badly do you want it back here? That's the big question, you see. Because if you're going to get something off the moon, you have to carry the fuel there to accelerate it to about 8,000 miles per hour, which is the escape velocity from the moon. And if you're going to carry the fuel there, that means that you have to cut down on your instrumentation. And the fact of the matter is that by remote control and by using these drilling apparatuses and microscope packages, radiation counters, scintillation counters, and all other kinds of devices, and feeding the information into a radio circuit, we can get all the information that we want from this particular kind of an expedition.
The package itself is expendable, then,
Yes.
once it's released its information.
Yeah, then the moon people up there can use it.
Well, Dr. Brantley, I want to ask you more about this Apollo project, when it's supposed to be completed and so on. But right now, let's pause for just a moment to hear a word from the American Museum Hayden Planetarium.
How about you? Are you going to take a trip to the moon? You can, in the air-conditioned comfort of the American Museum Hayden Planetarium. This Tuesday, July 3rd, the planetarium opens its summer sky show, Apollo and the Moon, and it's a show you won't want to miss. From ancient times, man has been yearning for the moon, and some of his earliest ideas about how he might eventually reach it are illustrated in the new planetarium presentation. Now we are on the threshold of that giant step into space. Audiences at the Sky Show will see a preview of the United States lunar probe that Dr. Brantley is discussing on this morning's program. Finally, through the magic of its unique visual effects, the planetarium will transport its visitors to the surface of the moon. The vantage point is deep in a lunar crater, and above the steep crater walls, the stars shine more brilliantly than from anywhere on Earth. Are you coming along? It's the Summer Sky Show, starting this Tuesday at the American Museum Hayden Planetarium, 81st Street and Central Park West in New York. There are several shows each day and every evening except Monday.
Thank you. This morning we're talking about Project Apollo and the race to the moon with Dr. Franklin M. Brantley, Associate Astronomer at the American Museum Hayden Planetarium. Dr. Brantley, do you think the Russians are ahead of us in this race to the moon?
Well, I don't think it's a case of what I think. It's what the facts say. And the fact of the matter is that the Russians have photographed the far side of the moon with extremely sophisticated equipment, which means that everything worked beautifully, their launching vehicle and the instrumentation in the probe itself. They have also landed a missile on the moon, and it was intended to land there, so this also speaks well for their abilities. Personally, I feel myself that the Russians have had a good many failures, and I think if I were a Russian and involved in their space program, I would be trying very hard to put a man on the moon, because whoever does this first is going to have a terrific propaganda advantage. And in the past, they've been doing beautifully and taking advantage of every possible space achievement.
Mm-hmm. Well, why do they keep this giant step ahead of us? Is their basic scientific technology that much better than ours?
Well, I think, Tex, that the main reason why they have been able to do so well is because they have gotten a very powerful launching vehicle. And you see, all of our ventures have had to be pared down in weight so that we can get a lot of instrumentation within a small weight package.
Mm-hmm.
We can't afford to waste anything. And with the Russian probes, they've been able to push in whatever they wanted because their launching vehicle is so powerful, they can push it up into orbit.
It's a basic horsepower race, then.
Yeah, and our problem, of course, is that we don't have a really powerful launching vehicle. The best we have now is the Atlas D, which is a modified Atlas vehicle, and we have the Atlas Centaur, which is coming, but which didn't do too well in the preliminary test. When we get that, and when we get Saturn and Nova and so on, then we'll really be going to town.
Well, getting back to the basic United States program itself, Apollo, if by extrapolating plans that are on paper and in minds right now, when do you think we'll have a man on the moon? Whether we'll be first or second or third?
Well, the official date that's being bandied around at the NASA headquarters, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is 1968. And this is a reasonable date, providing our launching vehicle program moves along smoothly.
Well, you spoke of the Saturn rocket, the beefier job we have on plan right now. That is actually being developed for the manned shot to the moon, isn't it?
Well, yes, and for other jobs, too. But the immediate target is for the manned shot of the moon. You see, the thing is that we don't know exactly how this is going to be achieved, that is Project Apollo. We have a pretty good idea in certain respects, but there are three different ways of doing it. We can shoot 3 men to the moon directly with the Nova rocket, which is a long ways off. This is a fabulous thing, developing several million pounds of thrust. We can also put 3 men into orbit by 2 rendezvous techniques. That is, we can shoot a 3-manned vehicle to the moon. We can put it into a lunar orbit, not landing it now, but just putting it into orbit around the moon. And then we can release from that vehicle a 2-manned taxicab, if you want to call it that. And this 2-man taxicab will take the 2 men down to a landing on the lunar surface. After they've made their explorations, they will have carried with them enough fuel to take off, to go back into a lunar orbit, to rendezvous with the mother ship, and then to return to a Earth-circling orbit and make a landing on the Earth. This is one technique. I've given you 2, the direct shot and the lunar rendezvous. And the one that is very appealing, I think, and which has lots of potential, is an Earth rendezvous operation. And this will call for 2 Saturn vehicles. And the first Saturn will launch what is called an escape rocket. And this is not, well, when we use the word escape, we mean escaping from the Earth's gravitational field.
Oh, not emergency equipment.
Now, this will be a tanker, what is called a tanker ship. It'll carry fuel. It'll be an engine loaded with fuel, and it'll go in orbit around the Earth. And when that's successfully in orbit, then a second advanced Saturn fires and puts a 3-man module into orbit. And the 3-man module will be in a lower orbit, so it'll go faster than the tanker. And it'll catch up with the tanker, and once it gets caught up to it, then it will change orbit, and it will hook up with the tanker. And when they're satisfied that everything is in good shape, and when they're oriented properly, they fire the engine, which is on the escape rocket, you see, and they will be going at that time about 18,000 miles an hour. When they fire the engines, they'll be going 25,000 miles an hour. And this will put them into an orbit that will carry them to the moon. They'll also have fuel aboard so that they can make corrections in flight, and everything should go along very well.
If we could establish a launching pad in constant orbit and keep jumping off from there, it would solve a great many problems, wouldn't it?
Sure
the
it would.
horsepower push.
Sure it would.
Basically.
Yeah.
Well, what will the final, this is just getting them there, what is the final stage of Apollo going to be like?
Well, the final stage is going to be very much like the landing of Scott Carpenter and John Glenn. That is, the three men will be in a module, a section of the ship that'll be shaped so that it will be able to withstand high temperatures, have an ablation shield on it so the heat will cause it to peel away and so on. It'll have 3 large parachutes built into it. As it comes into the atmosphere, it'll go way up in temperature. 3,000, 4,000 degrees will certainly be reasonable. And then as its velocity diminishes, these parachutes will open up, flare out, and lower the service module with the 3 men aboard down onto the surface of the Earth. It could make a landing on solid Earth, or it could make a landing on the water. In either case, there would be pickup facilities.
Gee, this sounds so fantastic, and with 68, actually, as things go, such a short time away, it brings back again the thought that we are perched on a fascinating rim of a brand new world and experience out there, aren't we?
We certainly are. We have a whole new horizon opening up for us.
And I want to thank you very much for explaining and helping us live a part of this great program that is a part of the American effort in space. We've had the pleasure of talking with Dr. Franklin M. Branley, Associate Astronomer at the American Museum Hayden Planetarium. This is Tex Antoine, hoping that you'll join me again next Sunday morning at the same time for another exciting journey into nature.
Journey into Nature has been a special program produced by WNBC in cooperation with the American Museum of Natural History. Join us again next week as we explore the museum, seeking out the natural wonders of our world. Journey into Nature is produced by Gary Stradling. Your host, Tex Antoine. This is Fred Collins. This program was pre-recorded and heard around the world through the facilities of the Voice of America and the Armed Forces Radio Service. Senator Jacob Javits will be the guest on Searchlight this afternoon at 2:05 on WNBC Radio, 660 on the dial.